Selling is not telling. The telling has happened. Marketing did that job. Selling, especially in a modern context, is helping Monique accomplish what she wants to. It's listening, it's asking, it's understanding, and it's helping and guiding. It's more like a consultative or coaching relationship than a telling relationship.
This podcast is brought to you by MarketMuse, an AI-powered platform that sets the standard for content quality. Visit marketmuse.com to discover your content opportunities. Hey there, I'm Bernie Borges, Chief Customer Officer at Vengreso, the leader in digital sales transformation. I'm also the host of this show, the Modern Marketing Engine podcast. On this podcast, I showcase B2B marketers in the trenches, showcasing strategies and tactics that are working for them in their modern marketing journey. Be sure to listen to the end of each conversation for my summary and takeaway, as well as the closing message. And now, here's this week's Modern Marketer. Welcome to episode 292. My guest on this episode is Dave Boyce, Chief Strategy Officer at Xant. Dave, welcome to the Modern Marketing Engine podcast.
I'm finally on it. Bernie, I've been looking so forward to this. Thank you for having me.
I've been looking forward to this conversation. I remember the first time that we discussed this topic and just said, all right, we've got to do a podcast on this. So let me tee it up for the listener, what we're going to talk about, Dave. This is an awesome topic, and that is how buyers buy and how sellers sell in 2021. And Dave, for the listener, I just want them to know that this is based on two, not one, but two really amazing articles that you published on LinkedIn. And of course, we're going to link that up in the show notes to make it real easy for the listener to go read those articles. And you published an article on how the future of buying and the future of selling. And so what I asked you to do is, hey, let's get on a podcast recording and let's talk about this topic of how buyers are buying and how sellers are selling. But before we do that, before we dive into that, give us an introduction to your company, Xant. Who is Xant and your role there as Chief Strategy Officer?
Yeah, I love it. Thanks, Bernie. So Xant is a SaaS platform. It's a sales engagement platform used by modern selling teams. It helps salespeople stay organized on next best prospect and next best action. We use AI to back that up. It helps marketing teams be confident that the sales teams are working on the stuff that's coming over from marketing. My role as Chief Strategy Officer is to look into the future, to figure out how we want to play our hand based on that view of the future, but also figure out how we can guide the industry to where the future is, meaning marketing and sales teams who are customers of our platform. So this is a great conversation topic for today, Bernie.
Fantastic. You know, I told you before we had this podcast recording, when we were planning for it, that your job sounds like so much fun. Looking into the future, planning for it, guiding the industry, that just sounds like a blast. So you actually get paid to do that, huh?
Well, yeah, I have to do some stuff that's, less fun, but no, it's an ideal job. It has to, what reports into me is who we partner with, how we go to market, I work very closely with the product team on product strategy. And so I do get to spend time with people like yourself and others who are also looking into the future. And I couldn't ask for a better job.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, so let's get into it. So we are here to talk about how buyers buy and how sellers sell in 2021. And in these articles, both these articles, which again, we're going to link up in our show notes page, you begin with a quote. And in the buying article, you say the world has evolved. Buying decisions are evaluated by digital natives and they think differently. So let's begin with that. Let's begin with buying. Why do you start with that comment?
It is so easy as a marketer. I'm going to take it from a marketer standpoint to get caught up in the mechanics of the job and forget who the ultimate buyer is. Think about for 1 second where your buyer is right now today. She's in her living room.
Yeah.
She's in her living room. And the person who signs the purchase order is working with someone else who's also in her living room.
Yeah.
And that someone else is the one, that you or I would rely on, that our buyer would rely on to do the research. And everything is remote. So that person doing the research, has come into her own. She's a digital native. She's learned how to do research. She knows how to get information on the internet. And we depend on her when we're buying things. Our buyer depends on her when they're buying things to guide us down a path and make sure we're understanding the latest and greatest information about whatever the thing is that we're buying. So I think it's extraordinarily important to remember that our buyers are doing their job from their living room collaboratively and over the internet.
Let me get your opinion on this, Dave. The term digital native. I am not a digital native by age, but I consider myself a digital native.
Yeah, they call you a digital immigrant.
Yeah, I don't like that word.
Okay. All right. Then let's just grandfather ourselves into native.
Yeah. My point is that I think a lot of it is sort of mindset now. So you're
Right.
saying that the buyer is a digital native. So let's put age aside.
Yep.
And like you said, she's in her living room, and we all live on these Zoom calls, and we see the background. Some of them are green screens, and oftentimes they're not. They're just, like you said, they're the living room. So what's that buying process look like for the modern buyer in 2021?
It is okay. Great. Let's go there. In the article, we name a persona named Monique who has gotten tasked by her boss to go buy a new ticketing system or to lead the process for selecting a ticketing system. Of course, there'll be multiple people who will have to sign off on it, but Monique gets put on the pointy end of this decision. She's an operations manager. So Monique is a digital native, and when she gets that job, the first thing she does is go to the internet. She hits Google. She reads what she can. She reads some articles. Once she thinks she's got the general parameters of what ticketing systems are all about, she then hits a few of the websites for the vendors that she's learned about. And some of those may have easy to navigate learning experiences, and some of them not so easy. Some of them may have good, helpful content in front of a gate. Others may have all their helpful content hidden behind a gate. Monique doesn't love having to fill out forms and go behind a gate. So she learns what she can. And then here's a huge thing about digital natives. They trust their network. So once she's done that amount of homework, she hits up her network, people she graduated with, people she worked with in her first job. And she does a lot. She might do that over LinkedIn. She might do that over text message, depending on how well she knows people. And anyone who's had experience in this realm will come back and say, oh, go here, don't go there. I had a good experience with this. I didn't have a good experience with that. She's now done. She's now 60, 70% of her way towards understanding at least what the options are. And the remaining amount of her journey, she's going to have to do collaboratively, probably with the sales team. But her partner, her silent partner, during that 70% of her journey was our marketing team. Not that they were talking to her,
right,
but that they were publishing and orchestrating and curating a learning journey that was either easy to use and therefore she really leaned into it, or is less easy to use and therefore she learned from our competitor.
And you mentioned that she doesn't love to fill out a form. And of course, we marketers, put out forms and gate content, and, that's part of lead gen, and, it's just become the norm, right? So what's the role of free content, meaning ungated, versus gated content on that journey?
We've been seeing the industry move more and more content in front of the gate. It's not 100%. You're going to need that gate. You're going to need that contact information. But here's something else in this example when you read it through. there there are intent detection services. I'll name one, Xant, who know when search terms that you specify spike for a certain prospect's domain. So as soon as Xant, which in this example is installed, shows that Monique's company's searches for ticket management software are trending up, it can flag Monique's company as someone who is in market.
Okay.
So I don't need to know who Monique is yet, but what happens then is a tool like Playbooks from Xant, that's our product, sees that flag in CRM and enrolls 5 personas into plays. So this means now they have to have already been in my CRM, and one of those personas may or may not be Monique, depending on whether I have her in my CRM. But I know they're in market, and so I spool up my sales team, even though Monique has never filled out a form. And in this case, I hit.
Okay. So at that point, then you're providing some information to the sales team that shows that this company and these personas, well, this company has been searching for content on ticketing systems. These are the personas that have been imported into the system, and then do your outreach.
Exactly. And, this obviously, if she fills out a form, it's a more direct chain of custody. But even if she doesn't fill out a form, I can still get to her. And to the extent I have a modern stack sitting behind my whole content engine, meaning intent detection and a sales engagement platform, I can probably be talking to Monique before any of my competitors.
Okay. Let's talk about what happens when Monique engages with, let's say she identifies 3 vendors just through her own journey, and she starts to engage. What are you seeing in the context of how buyers are buying in 2021? What are you seeing how Monique, the buyer in this example, engages with those sellers?
I love that you're running with this person with a name. Monique, she's a real person. She's got a real career. She's got a real job. And, when she shows up in a conversation with us, more likely we show up in a conversation with her, we have to remember she's got things in her head. She's got questions in her head. She's done a lot of homework. She may know as much about our product as we do, and maybe even more about our competitors than we do. Hopefully not. But she's got questions in her head. So it's our job at that point to figure out whether or not we can help her get her job done, and whether or not we can guide her down a process that will get that will have that impact. So it is selling, as Vengreso knows better than anyone else, selling is not telling. The telling has happened. Marketing did that job. Selling, especially in a modern context, is helping Monique accomplish what she wants to. It's listening, it's asking, it's understanding, and it's helping and guiding. It's more like a consultative or coaching relationship than a telling relationship.
Yeah, I agree. A word that I've seen, and I believe it's in your article, is being a concierge.
Yeah.
Being someone who is actually a resource. We use the word resource. Be a resource to the buyer. And then the role of marketing, of course, is to equip the salespeople with the content and content in general. It's a broad category, but the things that salespeople can use to be that resource to the buyer.
I love that. And, we put ourselves back in the situation with Monique. She's going to be not only engaging with us, but also with, in your example, 2 of our competitors. So Who's going to be the best resource? Whoever makes themselves the most relevant, the earliest, is in pole position. I have to have 2 others because, if I'm Monique, I've got to have a decision to make, got to run a process. But somebody showed up early, and somebody showed up with a real mindset towards helping me, and that's the person I'm going to be preferring through the balance of the process.
Yep. One thing that actually hasn't changed, Dave, in the decades that I've been in my career, and even probably before my career, is the old, know, like, and trust, right? People do business with people they know, like, and trust. The difference is the modern buying journey you just described, right? In Monique's example, but in the end, Monique found not just the company, but she's going to find the people that she knows, likes, and trusts, that she's willing to risk her own career, or at least her current job, to say, I looked at these three. This is the one that I recommend we seriously consider or go with.
I love that.
And the people, because we don't buy from logos, we don't buy from a building, we buy from people, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not going to call 1-800, vendor when I have an issue. I'm going to call the person I know. So I want to make sure that person is someone whose advice I trust and who I know I can get in touch with and can guide me not only through the purchase, but also beyond.
Yep, exactly. Okay. So we've looked at modern buying. We've looked at the example of Monique. I love that example, and I'll include that in my recap. Let's look at selling. Let's look at modern selling, how sellers are selling in 2021. Before we do that, though, I want to just take a brief break and just get a word in from our sponsor. MarketMuse is a content intelligence platform that sets the standard for content quality. Their AI-powered software enables companies to create predictably better content at scale that increases traffic and engagement, improves productivity, and drives revenue. Get more out of your content with personalized recommendations and strategic content insights. Go to marketmuse.com and use code Vengreso10 to claim 10% off your first year. All right, so in looking at selling, Dave, you begin that article with a quote from Mary Shea, PhD, from Forrester Research. And her quote says, "There's no going back to the future and no new normal. This is a watershed moment. B2B sales leaders must embrace change and plan for a very different buying and selling landscape." Wow. I mean, that's a pretty profound statement on the part of Mary Shea. So what are you seeing in the way that modern sellers are going to market and selling?
Mary is so right. I'll just back that up with a few statistics. In the United States, 56.5% of our B2B sales force have the title field seller, which means over 50% of our sellers in the United States right now are either A, out of a job, or B, they're doing a completely different job than quote unquote field selling.
Right.
We're doing selling, we're doing living room selling, we're doing Zoom selling. And to the extent that, Mary says there's no going back to the future, to the extent that we want to wait for things to get back to how they were, it is not going to happen for two reasons. One, the buyer doesn't want it.
Yep.
The buyer doesn't want these protracted information kind of exchanges with salesperson. They don't want to retreat again from acquiring information digitally. They don't want us to force them into the conference room to have a stakeholder meeting with a whiteboard. They actually like the way it's working right now.
Yep.
And two, it's better for everybody. It's better for our company. It's better, CFOs don't want to sign those expense reports. If we're honest with ourselves as salespeople, we're more efficient if we're not spending our time navigating airports and trains and cabs and Ubers, and instead we're on the job of selling for most of our time. So it's not going back. We have to figure out how to lean into the future and do it faster than our competition.
Yep. I can only agree with you 100%. The only caveat that I'll throw in there, Dave, is that the whether it's old school or not, I guess anything pre-COVID times is maybe to some extent old school, right? Because we used to get on airplanes, we used to go to conferences, we used to, go to buildings, get in an elevator, meet with people in conference rooms, etc. Right? But I think one of the biggest things that we all miss from that is just the ability to really meet with people in person, read the body language, and just connect with them, as human beings in person. So there's kind of a trade-off. Yes, there's more efficiency that we're experiencing by doing it digitally now, but we do have that trade-off. But we don't have much choice. like Mary Shea said, and you've just confirmed, we're not going back.
I'm sure we will embrace those opportunities to connect in person in the future. 100%. I'm with you on that 100%. But it won't be the bulk of what we do, because we will have learned that there is also another way. So we'll end up cross-fading back in to a portion of that, but we're not going to forget our digital muscle.
Yeah, it'll be kind of hybrid is
Yeah.
really the word that I like to use. Okay. So what are you seeing in terms of the way sales operations are structured in the modern selling environment?
Yeah. So every sales ops leader, every revenue leader, CRO, head of a sales team is thinking right now, what do I do about that? What do I do about this dilemma? Where half of my team, all of my team, if I'm a field sales manager, is working from their living room. I can't manage my walking around. I can't tell myself that the skills that they learned walking the halls of customers are serving them well right now, because they're not walking the halls of customers. So which skills are they using? How do I make myself comfortable with that? How do I reinvent what I'm doing? Choice A, wait for it to go back. Bad choice. Choice B, rethink. And when we are thinking about how to rebuild our go-to-market motion, we've got to keep everything from the first half of our conversation in mind. Who is the buyer? How is she getting her job done? Where's she getting her information? Where do we show up in her buying cycle? And how do we add value? The number one thing I think we can do, those of us who are digital natives asterisk, because I don't want to say digital immigrants, is really meet our buyer where she is. Think about how she's doing her job, and then think about what it must feel like to interface with somebody in whose eyes you cannot look, and a sense for whose person you can't get from an in-person meeting. And let's figure out how she likes to communicate, and let's meet her where she is. We don't want to drag her down our selling process. We want to help her on her buying process. And that probably means a little more digital, a little faster responses. A fast response is better than a perfect response tomorrow. It means a little more free with our information, a little more consultative, and just a lot more empathetic. And the fact that we get to see into each other's living room just plays right into that, because we can actually develop empathy as humans, because we're all going through the same thing right now.
Yeah, exactly. You actually you have 5 points in this article on attributes of the modern seller. Do you want to talk through those?
For sure. So, we know you noticed in the Monique example, if we have the right, and I'm going to call this a marketing tech stack stood up, we can know when somebody is in market for our product. And if we have that connected to the right sales tech stack, we can be talking to Monique before she's ever filled out a form and before any of our competitors. I call that fast in the article. The modern seller is fast. We don't wait around. The modern seller is also always online. So, for us digital natives asterisk, we have to make sure we got our online chops. Yep. DMing over LinkedIn is fair game if Monique is willing to go there. And DMing after hours is fair game, and on the weekend. So we're not constrained to what we can do in a conference room. Always online, we're going to go at the speed and over the modes of communication that she's comfortable with, and much of that is online.
That's a huge one, Dave. Just to comment on that, that's a huge one. It's certainly an observation that I've seen. We've all seen it, right? Just everyone is unique. Everyone is different. Some people respond to text. I can think of someone who just didn't reply to emails, but text him and he responded, right? And to your point, business hours, non-business hours, sometimes the lines are just blurred on that. It's all about being where the buyer is and being a resource to the buyer. So that's a key one right there.
Yeah. So we can retool. We can get there if we're not already there. Customer centric. We talked a little bit about the empathy with which we want to engage our buyer, and then the helpful resource that we want to be to our buyer. That's customer centricity. It's about the job she's trying to get done versus the job we're trying to get done. We, of course, get paid when we close a deal, but the way that we're going to close a deal in the modern world, because we are a tenant at will in this relationship, she can literally stop answering our calls anytime, is to be a good, helpful resource to her. Customer centric is the third.
Yep.
And then really tied to that is content rich. So not only do I have an attitude of customer centricity, but I have something to add. I have some value to add. I show up in the conversation as a resource, to use your word. I love that word. And that means I have information.
Yep.
And I know about not only my product or service, but I also know about my competitors' products or services. And I can have a realistic conversation with her about the alternatives and about how to think about the alternatives and the content, rather than me saying, oh, I think I have an expert that knows something about that. Let me schedule a call. I'll get back to you with our availability. No, what I'd like to do is show up and be useful myself in that conversation, ideally.
Yep.
So fast, always online, customer centric, content rich, and then finally, technology enabled. And when I say technology enabled, it's not just about Zoom. It's not just about LinkedIn, the things that we've talked about so far. It's my entire stack. It's this really tight, short cycle connection between marketing systems, sales systems, and my ability to manage multimodal conversations across multiple prospects without losing track. Technology is my friend. I can put it on like an Iron Man suit and be way more effective than I could in the Delta Lounge at an airport. And that is one of the most exciting things I think about modern selling for those of us who want to step forward into this world is there is a whole world out there that allows us to do our job way better than we ever did. And we get there faster. We're going to outpace our peers as well.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm going to add one more that's kind of an intangible. It probably fits best under customer centric, I think, but you tell me. And this is also old school, but I think can very, very much be part of our 2021 selling strategy. And that is helping the customer understand not only how you can help them solve their problem, but how it's going to be good for their career. So in this case, using Monique as the example, if Monique buys from me, my ticketing system, how's that going to be helpful to her career? Like that's going to be part of my strategy if I'm the seller in engaging with Monique. I'm going to be not just a resource to her from the standpoint of helping her make the decision, but also a resource to her in her career.
Oh my goodness. We did not talk about this beforehand, just in case anyone thinks that we that this was planned. Bernie, I could not agree more. If I believe in my product or service, then I believe that it's going to help Monique, who's going to put her career on the line. And then what I owe her is an ability to advance her career based on that decision. Now, of course, hopefully it helps her do her job better. Like her company and she herself and her boss and her operating unit are now achieving better results than they did before as a result of my product or service. But what I also want is for her to be able to tell her story and meet her peers and collaborate with them about where they are. So I owe her connection into my ecosystem, and I owe her opportunities to tell the story at the center of which is her. So one of the things that we do, this just as an example, is we give our champions an opportunity to test out their capability of storytelling, first internally, then on maybe a forum like this one, pre-recorded, where they can talk to their peers about how they got their organization from here to there. And then the most camera ready and credible of our champions, we're going to get right on to main stage at a live event telling their story. And if you don't think that's going to propel your career when you're Monique, right, that puts you right front and center on the cutting edge of doing interesting things. And we as vendors can help, to your point, can help propel the careers of our executive sponsor champions.
Absolutely. All right, Dave, I think that is a good break point or transition point to my summary. I'm also watching our time. So I want to do the recap now. And then after my recap, I'm going to invite you to add any color commentary that you like. And then we'll ask you for your digital contact information and then wrap it up. So we began our conversation with an introduction to your company, Xant. Love the name, Xant, for those that may not know the spelling and you're hearing it for the first time. You're a SaaS platform, you're a sales engagement platform, really helping the modern seller by enabling them to know what the next best actions are and also helping marketing be confident that the stuff that they're giving to sales is being used and it's being used the right way. So that's fantastic. Your role there is Chief Strategy Officer. You're looking into that crystal ball, looking into the future. You want to guide the industry, but you work very closely internally with product teams, marketing, sales, et cetera, to really develop that long-term strategy. So we, of course, focused our conversation on how buyers are buying and how sellers are selling in 2021. And we began with our conversation being focused on the buyer. And you said that today's buyer's in her living room and the people that are signing POs are also in their living room, right? So, and she's a digital native. And so that what that really looks like is that everybody that is involved in that process is using digital channels. They go to Google, they're reading articles, they're consuming content, they're hitting vendors' websites, they're having an experience by hitting those websites. Could be good, could be not so good, right? So obviously marketing needs to focus on providing that great experience. Also, that modern buyer is not crazy about filling out forms, even though we do have some content that's gated. So, to the extent that we can use technology like intent signals, you mentioned that, so that we know when buyers are visiting the website, and then using a tool like Xant that actually helps enable like when that information is available, then you can deploy your sales team to go do the outreach to the personas from that company that visited the website. Then that buyer is going to trust their network and contact people that they know from school, from work. They're going to use LinkedIn. They're going to use social. They're going to text, and they're going to go on their journey 60, 70% on their own. And then I love what you said here, that her silent partner is the marketing team, and it's our marketing team is the seller, right? So to the extent that we're delivering a good experience to Monique, the buyer in this example, then that's the partner. That's our partner in reaching Monique, the buyer. And once she engages with salespeople, she comes to that conversation well equipped, well informed. She's done her homework, and the salesperson needs to be someone who can help her, someone who can guide her down her decision process by listening, by asking questions, by being a resource to her, by leveraging content. And then Monique is ultimately going to make the decision by saying, who's going to be the best resource for me? Who's going to be the one that really is going to help me solve this problem? So that was modern buying in 2021. And then we looked at modern selling. You said that in the US, 56.5% of the B2B sales force were field sellers. So that obviously in the last roughly 10 months or so means that those sellers are in a totally different environment, right? So and buyers like it this way. They like this new model. They don't want to go back to the old model. So really, the dilemma that sellers and sales leaders are really focused on, like how do we modernize our sales team, right? And we've got to remember, as you said, got to focus on the buyer. Where is that buyer, and how do we add value? So you listed the five modern selling attributes, and you said the first one is fast. We've got to be able to move quickly and contact people either when we get a signal that that buyer's out there and they're looking, or if we do get an actual lead, we've got to be fast. And then that kind of ties with the second one, which is being online all the time, always online, right? If the buyer wants to engage you through DM, text, whatever it may be, just engage the buyer the way the buyer wants to engage. And then being very customer centric, being empathetic, being helpful. We talked also about communicating how we can help that buyer in their career. That's part of being customer centric. And then you talked about being also content rich, adding value with information that is helpful to the buyer, even knowing about your competitors, the industry, their company, their industry, just being very helpful and leveraging content to do that. And then the fifth and final one is being technology enabled. And you said it's not just Zoom, it's not just LinkedIn, but the entire marketing and tech stack, your CRM, your prospecting tools, leveraging all of them to be as productive as possible so that you know exactly what opportunities to work on, when to work on them, so you can really maximize your potential as a modern seller. So, Dave, I'll leave my summary there. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Anything I would say would dilute it. Bernie, I can see why you've been so successful at your job. That was a fantastic summary. I love this conversation. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Dave. I really appreciate you. I wish we could talk longer, and the only reason we say we can is because we know that the listener typically, wants about a 30-minute podcast, give or take, right? So we're going to give the listener what they want. So I'll close with this, Dave. Where can my listener connect with you online so they can just connect with you and learn more about what you've got going on?
So, Bernie, at the beginning of the podcast, you mentioned these 2 articles. There is a very active conversation happening right now in the comments section of those 2 articles on LinkedIn. I would certainly invite you to join that conversation, challenge me, make suggestions. I'd love to collaborate with you on the future of selling, the future of buying, and connect with me. If you find the articles, you'll find me. My LinkedIn handle is Boyce Dave, BoyceDave.
Fantastic. Well, Dave, my listener knows that will be linked up in our show notes page at Vengreso.com. Dave, I just want to thank you so much for, first of all, writing those 2 articles. Those are very well written, well organized, well researched articles. I think I mentioned to you that I would have paid to read them. They were that good. And thank you for taking the time to join me here to discuss it on this episode of the Modern Marketing Engine podcast. Don't forget to use the code Vengreso10 for 10% off your personalized content recommendations at marketmuse.com. Hey, that's a wrap for this episode of the Modern Marketing Engine podcast. Hey, if you're not subscribed, I invite you to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast player so that you don't miss a single episode. And I'd love it if you give the Modern Marketing Engine podcast a rating or review in Apple Podcasts. That really helps others to discover it. We publish a show notes page for each episode with links to the resources that were mentioned during the conversation. Just go to Vengreso.com and navigate to the podcast menu. And while you're there, be sure to check out our Modern Selling podcast hosted by Vengreso's CEO, Mario Martinez Jr. Hey, are you following the Modern Marketing Engine podcast on the socials? We're active on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and on YouTube. In fact, we publish each episode on YouTube for those who listen to audio content on YouTube. Hey, one last thing. If you and I are not connected on LinkedIn, I invite you to send me a personal invitation to connect. Now, please be sure to say that you're a listener of the Modern Marketing Engine podcast. If you don't include a personal note, I have no way of knowing that that's how you found me. Until next time, I wish you continued success on your modern marketing journey.